The US government has held on to Mubarak for 30 years. Some people might ask how a dictator can last, so despised by his people, for 30 years. You might say he had a coat of armor made in the USA, one of the few things still made in the USA. But that was, you know, the weapons, $2 billion he got year after year. Every arms manufacturer making a fortune. I remember one Sunday morning watching George Will on ABC, and his observation was, it is not as if, I mean, the Egyptian people's problem, he said, is they don't have a Václav Havel, they don't have a Lech Walesa, a real leader. The next day, I was taking a cab and met the cab driver was an Alexandrian medical doctor from Alexandria in Egypt. And I shared what George Will had said, and I said, what do you think of this? And he said, we have more than 80 million people in Egypt. He said, we have the oldest universities in the world. We could populate 10 governments. You know, just take your boot off of us for a moment. And that's what this revolution is about. But I wanted to ask, as a person of two cultures, you've grown up outside in the West, but you're very tied to Egypt, and you're a filmmaker. The media coverage you watched before and after when you were outside, and how you plan to frame this with the filming that you've done in Tahrir.
Wow. The coverage was so much better on Al Jazeera that I found it hard to spend any time watching anything else.
What about Al Jazeera was different?
Well, it's just telling it. Al Jazeera was just telling you what was happening, and you don't have to keep listening to people explaining why this is important for America or for Israel, or an old white Republican giving you his opinion on it, which really is irrelevant, because the key thing in Tahrir and about this was that it wasn't about PR or about waiting for America to do something or about what Obama says. It didn't make a difference. This was the people taking their lives into their own hands, doing it peacefully, just putting their bodies on the line, and that was what was making things happen. And so, listening to Hillary Clinton or David Cameron say this is sort of disgusting, as you know, you'll have someone hurling rocks at you, Molotov cocktails, it was just so irrelevant. And that felt great. Lots of filmmakers, they were all there, and I think we're going to put everything together under Creative Commons and just have it open for all the films that can be made to come out of this. And I think that is the way forward for the framing. And I think that follows the whole spirit of the whole revolution, really, just throwing it open to anybody that wants it, and you know, just do what you will with it.
I did a great deal of journalism, of reporting, from Tahrir and from the revolution, and that continues because people want to know, and so you're asked to do it, and you feel that, well, frankly, that the more actual Egyptian voices are out there talking in English to the West, the better it is, because then it's our story framed the way we want it framed, with our emphasis on whatever we want to emphasize, and so so you do that. I mean, obviously it was a tremendous drag sometimes, because you know, you had to be sitting there writing instead of sort of being part of what's happening, and particularly particularly because there was no internet, for example. So there were times when I wrote the piece in longhand in the square with sort of like the light from this acting as a torch. And then I had to dictate it down the line, like sort of the old black and white movies, except of course, you know, nothing like as glamorous. You know, I didn't have a fedora and a cigarette. I feel much more in the moment. I feel completely a citizen rather than a writer. So when I've been doing the journalism, I've had to be a writer of sorts, in that I've had to choose, for example, I mean, you know, 30 things have happened, and you've got 600 words, so you've got to choose 2 things, and you've got to, you know, frame them right and phrase them right. So to that extent, you're being a writer, but you're being a very immediate kind of writer, and that's about all I can manage, really. I think I can't do that sort of being at a bit of a distance in order to process it as fiction or as art or as anything yet. An Egyptian journalist said to me, so like sort of, الأفكار الروائية, what are the novelistic thoughts that you, and I almost felt insulted, you know? You know, what are you talking about novelistic and artistic? You know, this is a people's revolution, I am a people.
What do you think needs to happen? You said you hope the army will protect the revolution. There's been some worrying developments recently. The army looked on or was in cahoots with Baltagaz. They cleared Tahrir, protesters there. There's been many arrests. There's been dozens of people who have been tried by military tribunal. The state security services are gone, but what's worrying is if the army is going to fill the void. What do you think needs to happen, either of you?
I don't know, the army's behavior is very, very scary now, and it really looks like they're coordinating what the paramilitaries are doing. A lot of the people that were killed on Tuesday were killed with bullets. Videos have come out of people's torture wounds. An actor has been arrested and is facing military trial. And he's an actor that does a lot of clown work for children, and they're accusing him of being a paramilitary thug. And no one really knows what they're doing. Like, on the one hand, it feels like maybe the army are totally schizophrenic and they do something one day, and then the next day they try and make amends, or they try and behave a bit better. Or they're just trying to keep an atmosphere of chaos and uncertainty carrying on every day so that they can really take sort of full control. But I don't know what one does apart from keep going out on the streets, really.
Well, there's division within the army, and this reflects the division. I mean, we don't know. But I guess, I mean, being not there, as you say, I mean, the thing is that the process that has happened so far has worked, and it is the only one that we have, and at the same time, we are in a better position to carry on with it because we've already had a victory and another one, and we do have a civilian cabinet of choice. I mean, it's not yet the elected one, but at least we got rid of the one that was a remnant of the old regime, and so there is an instrument, a political instrument that is there, that is supposed to be there to safeguard the revolution and to carry out the will of the people as far as it can until elections happen. And so I think that what is happening and that what people are trying to do is to continue mobilizing so that people still go out on the street in numbers that make it very difficult for the army to do anything about it, and at the same time to keep up the pressure on this government, on this cabinet that exists now, to curtail the activities of the army and to do radical things like actually disbanding central security services so that they cannot be brought back in. And there is, I suppose, an argument also which people are pursuing for speeding up the process of electing a president, because once you have an elected president, even if he is Amr Musa or al-Baradei or someone that you don't want forever, it means that the army is no longer acting president, and that therefore and has to report to a civilian president who is elected. And so these are really all of the avenues, as far as we can see, that are open to us, as well, of course, as the continual co-opting of the bits of the army that are on the street that people are with. And you will have seen the images of people sort of embracing the army and surrounding the tanks and sleeping on the treads and throwing their babies into the arms of the soldiers to be photographed, and keeping up this constant conversation, because of course the army is a conscript army. And you know, so these are not professional soldiers who are in there, and the officer class is mostly, but the soldiers out there on the ground are mostly conscripts, and as such, you know, you are regarded as belonging to the people and as possible to be, and of course we did have instances of people taking off their their uniform and handing over their weapons and joining the crowds. But it's a scary situation.
The key thing is, as long as people stay willing to mobilize themselves, I think the fact that, you know, Mubarak stepped down and X and Y happened, but state security was still there, and that was a real looming spectre, because that can come back and that can start torturing you and disappearing people in an instant. And then, when in Alexandria, some young men saw people taking out big trash bags out of one of the security buildings, and they went up to them and said, "What are you doing?" And they found that they were trying to get papers out, and so they stormed the building, and then there was this battle that was, whatever, last Saturday. And then all across the country that day, everyone got out and everybody stormed into state security buildings peacefully and, you know, got hold of all this evidence that was going to get destroyed, and effectively, you know, has basically crippled state security's sort of apparatus for now. And that's a very, very big deal, but it happened very quickly and it happened very easily. And so as long as people can keep putting themselves on the line and getting out there on the streets, I think it's all still to be hoped for.
I was wondering if we could bring in Sharif for a minute, because just before you left, you interviewed Omar Musa, asking him a number of questions about his past. If you could share some of what he said and what his plans are and where he comes from.
Well, Omar Musa is a career diplomat, so he's very good at not saying anything. But I think it's important to realize that he worked for 20 years with the Mubarak government, first as ambassador, deputy ambassador to the United Nations, he was ambassador to India. From 91 to 2001, he was the foreign minister of Egypt. And then, in a view, whether correct or not, he was replaced by Mubarak in what many see as he was becoming too popular. And he was replaced and installed as Secretary General of the Arab League. He does have a certain level of popularity amongst Egyptians. He's spoken out against Israel, and that made him very popular. But I think for people who are fighting for real change, he does not represent that. The problem I see with the current situation is that people like Omar Musa are the only ones who are known, and in 6 months, elections, for new people to form parties, campaign, fund, organize, and get popular support is simply not enough time. And so you're left with the remnants of the old regime who really have this apparatus to fund, to campaign, and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is essentially the situation we had before. That's not to say it's hopeless, but I think we have to be very clear, and I think you're absolutely right about the pressure that needs to continue throughout to make these changes and not have this revolution co-opted by the same entrenched interests that brought us to this position.